Yeah, well, yeah, we didn't hear a lot about that, but that is a concern, and the universities are concerned about where these analyses are being done. There's concern about what may happen in Venezuela, with Venezuela really being in kind of a crisis situation.
But did they get some aid from Venezuela at one point?
Yes, yes, they did, and I don't know specifically what's happened to that. I don't know if there's still aid that's being received by Bolivia, but yes, there was an important part of the initial early years of the Morales government, I think, was to get aid from Venezuela. Now I think that's much less feasible for Venezuela to provide that aid. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Just
Take the
tag
announcement.
on to what Alberto brought up. Tonight there is, I meant to mention this earlier, at 5 o'clock in the same room, we're going to be streaming a live webinar that will be dealing with Venezuela's economy. So if anybody wants to come, it's free. There's no cost. Sorry.
Yes, you have a question? Well, the only thing I know is what we heard from one of the sources we talked to, and that is that Morales has approved genetically modified organisms for use in Bolivia. That's all I know, and that, of course, could lead to a very serious situation, I think, in the Bolivian countryside for a number of probably at least small-scale producers. But that's all we heard. That is a part of what he has approved, that the GMO plants will be, the technology will be accepted in Bolivia.
I don't want to change the subject, but before you go, could you give us a minute on the peace negotiations in Havana?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. The FARC guerrillas in Colombia are engaged in peace discussions with the Colombian government. They are now at the point of listening to victims. They've heard from 5 sets of 12 each of victims, and the idea is that there's going to be recognition of crimes that were committed. The victims are not only, it's kind of an unusual circumstance because there are victims there who are victims of the paramilitaries as well as victims of the FARC, and some are victims of the Colombian military collaborating with paramilitaries. And so it's kind of an unusual circumstance. Some of the victims who are there in Havana really are not victims, were not victims of the FARC guerrillas. But to the degree that they were and they have been, their family members were lost because of the FARC guerrilla attacks. This process has gone forward, and I think it has succeeded in satisfying a lot of the concerns that the victims' families had. We've been discussing some of this with some of the people who were victims there, and it's a very difficult situation. If these crimes took place years ago, let's say 5, 10 years ago, and you're talking about some sort of pardon or some sort of an admission of guilt at this point, well, it's a long time ago, and there's a lot of hard feelings that have been involved between the occurrence of the murders or whatever they are and the present time. Hard to get that all straightened out. But they've been making progress with that. I myself have some doubts about, they've agreed, there are 5 or 6 different steps that they're going through. They're in the 4th one now, which is the victims' rights. The first one was essentially land reform, and you probably are familiar with some of the activities in land reform in Colombia, which hasn't gone very far, it seems to me. But there are plans for land reform on a local level. The government's negotiator, Sergio Jaramillo, was the kind of peace commissioner at this point, but a government representative, has talked about having organization in different areas some sort of organization so that they would support the peasants, the campesinos, and there would be some sort of a way that they would obtain title to their lands and they'd be able to produce. But there's another model there, which is what's called the zonas de reserva campesina, which are campesino reserve zones, or the peasant reserve zones. And I don't think that, again, the government hasn't accepted that as a model. And yet, a number of the popular organizations, we had a presentation here by Marilyn Serna from Colombia, who talked about it. This is one of the leaders of one of those peasant organizations. And she talked about how this, the government really hasn't proceeded to implement plans that are going to help the campesinos at this point. And I don't really think that's what President Santos has in mind. He has in mind an agro-export, large-scale production with lots of machinery. Get that in there and produce lots of products. And then there will be enough for the local people and there will be enough to send overseas. Well, when you start producing corn and you're talking about peasants who grow corn for a living, what kind of market are they going to have? Right now, Colombia imports a lot of rice, and those peasants who grow rice, or the campesinos who grow rice, I prefer the term campesinos, they really don't. There's no way that they can make up to even now. It's a very serious problem. I don't think it's been very well dealt with. The genetically modified seeds is another problem. Monsanto has a part of the free trade agreement between Colombia and the United States. Monsanto has been able to get genetically modified seed incorporated there. The campesinos have been told that they cannot use their seeds from the prior year for the next harvest. They have to go out and buy their seeds. And that has caused a lot of concern among the campesinos, and rightly so, I think. So you have this situation where that's a thing you don't have in Bolivia because there are no free trade agreements. There's no free trade agreement between Bolivia and the United States. So at least they're not suffering. This is really a bad agreement for Colombian peasants, rural Colombia. It's going to be destructive. And I think the plans of the government really are to end the small-scale producer model in the countryside.
Right. Well, thank you, Jan.
Well, thank you very much.
Hey.
Thank you very much. It's very informative.
Thank you.
You have a way with the crowd. My regards to Cecilia.
All is alright, still be strong. He standing knows who